we had a crucial GST Council meeting which ended this week, but without a decision on a major question. At least 16 states have talked about the issue of whether compensation to states, which was agreed upon at the inception of GST, should be extended or not beyond June 30th. We're speaking now to the Finance Minister of Tamil Nadu, Dr. P. Thiagarajan, on some of these issues. Sir, thank you so much for speaking with us here at ET now. Let me begin by asking you why there was no real conclusion on the issue of GST compensation extension to states. What was discussed in this meeting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not uncommon in this council because, as I've said multiple times in the past, from the vision to the design to the execution of the GST, many things have been left ill-defined or undefined. And so, it is only though it's supposed to be fiscal federalism, and to be honest, in the meeting, the Honorable Union Finance Minister runs it very democratically and allows everybody the chance to speak. Especially, I've been happy with the way the group of ministers have performed on specific topics. So I'm not criticizing everything, but some profound issues like how the agenda gets set, when it gets distributed, and whether decisions that are supposed to be made by the GST Council are actually made by the GST Council or by the Union government in isolation after the meeting is over. These issues continue to plague us, and we don't have clarity yet on that. 5 years after the regime of GST has been introduced.
Yes, but let me come to you on the specific question about the extension of compensation. How many members of the council were agreeable to the concept of extension? And then, the larger question that I'm asking you, does it make sense to keep extending this deadline? For how long will it continue?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to say. I thought I heard almost every state, certainly informally and formally, every state that spoke talked about extending the compensation. Some were for longer, some were for less time, some were for a particular methodology, some just had a general request. But to be honest, I didn't hear anybody explicitly say it was not a good idea. And everybody who spoke was for it, and this was across party lines, across BJP or non-BJP states. And at some level, it was given to the convener of the council, which is the Union Revenue Secretary, Mr. Tarun Bajaj, to allow it as an agenda item or not. He allowed it as an agenda item. Madam allowed everybody who had a chance to who wanted a chance to speak. But as is the case with a few things in the council, sometimes the conversation just ends up with no outcome. There's not a good way for the council to function, but it happens, and it happened in this case as well.
But let me get back to the basic question once again. I'm asking about the economic sense of continuing this compensation to states. Now, you can argue that in the last, few years, there was COVID-19 and the impact of COVID-19. But how do we know what will come next? And as we have seen, once any kind of compensation structure or tax is set in this country, it's rarely ever reversed. So can we expect consumers to keep on bearing the price of this cess? And in your view, does it actually make economic sense?
It's a fairly complicated question. I've written about it in some detail. I spoke about it in even greater detail during the council. There's always a plus and a minus, right? I agree that it shouldn't create what we call in economics or game theory a free rider problem. I also agree that 2 years of a pandemic nobody envisioned cannot be just written off. But I would say two things. I would say I'm concerned whether there is actually good faith on the part of the union government. Let's not forget, were this truly cooperative federalism and were this truly an empowered GST Council, then the GST Council should make the decision. It is not the prerogative of the union government alone to make the decision whether to extend or not extend. So in that sense, I would say there are many pluses and minuses, but the two things lacking, in my opinion, is clarity on why it is not decided by the council collectively as opposed to the union government alone, number one. And number two, whether the union government has the two prerequisites. As I say, if you have good faith, there are many structural solutions that can balance the free rider problem and the kind of real need for support for some states at least. You remember, the compensation is not a blanket amount, it's not a guarantee. It says if you don't hit a certain rate of growth, then we will make up that gap. Before COVID came, states like Tamil Nadu or Telangana in some years did not need any compensation because we hit the rate of growth. So, relatively speaking, states like ours are much less likely to rely on it because we have pre-COVID shown that we can hit the rate of growth and would not be eligible anyway. But that's not true of all states. You must remember that GST represents a profound shift away from taxation of production to taxation of consumption. And that skewed things in ways that maybe was not fully envisioned or calculated. So it's a very complex issue. I don't want to boil it down. I get where you're coming from, but it's not that simple. It's not that black and white.
Sir, but what is probably in black and white, some would argue, is that in this meeting this time around, there was an agreement on increasing the rates on several items. This is a time when inflation is high. People are feeling the pinch. Why was there an agreement to this, and was there any concern at all on what impact it would have on inflation?
No, of course, but you must remember that this council did not take up individual items except in a few cases where we overrode or turned away recommendations made by the Fitment Committee or by the GOM on rate rationalization. For the rest of the items, there were people tasked with going into it as a whole. Some items were increased purely for the sake of removing inversion, and if that's the case, they should not affect the common man too much. Some items were reduced, I think. Some items were kept stationary. For example, Tamil Nadu was among the states that objected to the 5% tax on cattle feed, and so that was not taken and it's left exempt. So, there was a range, I don't know, tens and tens of decisions, and some of them definitely will impact the common man. But again, because of the paucity of time and because of the complexity and number of issues, some of these were voted as a package as a whole based on the work of the GOM or based on the work of the Fitment Committee, and there may be individual decisions or individual issues. Had we descended to the level of taking up each one of those and making our priorities, I can guarantee you that we would have reached some kind of stasis and nothing would have happened over 2 days except deadlock. Now I'll go the other way. The broader issue here is not one item or one item being raised in rate or not. The broader issue here is that the nature of taxation, the proportion of overall revenue, tax revenue to the government of India has skewed significantly away from progressive direct taxation like income tax and corporate taxes as a percentage of total taxation towards indirect taxes like GST, which are effectively regressive because poor and middle class people spend much more of their money, of their income or their wealth on taxable goods and services. So effectively their tax rate is much higher, and therefore the skew is troubling, and I've had reason to comment on it in the past. But in the system that we have, we try to make the system work as well as possible. I have been a fairly strident critic from the vision to the design to the execution. I continue, but now as a member I try to be constructive and add more inputs within the council to improving the system. I would argue I've done my fair share or more of that in the GOMs that I've been a part of, as well as today's council meeting.
And of course, you've participated this time as a member. I believe you will be the host for the next GST meet. What will be foremost on the agenda then?
Actually, the Honorable Finance Minister has already indicated that it's a two-item agenda, at least. I hope that compensation will be taken up again because, as you know, though the period ends June 30th, the cess is going to continue, and so there's no bar on taking decisions in July or August saying that we will continue for a year or two. It's not as if it's extended by June 30th, the window of opportunity is closed. So I hope that will be taken up again. But Madam has clearly said that the review of or the retabling of the reworking of the GOM on casinos, horse racing and online gaming, which I was a member of, will be tabled in that meeting, as well as yet to be constituted GOM on the design of GST appellate tribunals, which were envisioned in the Act but have not yet been put in place in the last 5 years. That came up for discussion during this, and the technical side and the Secretariat presented various options. I was probably the early proponent that such complex issues should not be decided instantaneously in such a large hall where everybody couldn't be heard. I requested the Honorable Union Finance Minister that the GOM should be formed. Many others seconded my request, and so that GOM is also tasked with coming back. So the August meeting, as of now, the Honorable Union Minister, Finance Minister, has indicated a 2-item agenda: the GOM committee or the GOM report on gaming, horse racing, and casinos, online gaming, and the GOM yet to be constituted GOM on how the GST AT will be set up.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, sir.